Every day, aspiring musicians dream of getting out of their garages and taking their songs on the road for the world to hear. But not everyone's successful at making a living as a gigging musician. There's a right way and a wrong way to navigate the music business, and whether you're looking to book your first gig or plotting an extensive world tour, this show will help you demystify the live music industry by providing first-hand insights from artists and professionals who are doing it at the highest levels. Hey there, I'm Tony Neely, and this is the Book Your Band Podcast. All right, welcome everyone to this episode of the Book Your Band Podcast. As always, I am your host, Tony Neely, and today we have with us Mr. Randy Ojeda, who is an attorney who specializes in music law. So, Mr. Ojeda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate the invite.
We were chatting beforehand, and you're saying you used to have a podcast. You're going to be ramping it back up, that you got all of your old gear out for me.
Yeah.
It takes a while to set this stuff up.
It does. Yeah, I'm rocking the Focusrite, the RE320 mic, so hopefully I sound pretty good.
Oh, yeah. I'm simple. I'm a Blue Yeti straight into a Mac. I record everything in Squadcast and edit into script. The show is not sponsored by them yet, but it's just the tools I use. I like simple.
Yeah. I have a friend that works with Blue, so maybe I'll put in a good word for you.
Nice. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. They're great. They make great mics.
So tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to specialize in music law, and anything else that will kind of help set the context for our discussion.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I was a musician first. I picked up the bass kind of, I guess, around the same time you did when I was like 11 or 12. We had a little garage rock band that I was in and, kept playing in bands through high school and into college. And then I went to law school for some reason. I went to law school and kind of put my bass down and kind of, I initially wanted to be more of just like a regular corporate attorney. But while I was in law school, I was in Chicago, and there was this is a time when I call it the Chicago music renaissance. But this was when Chance the Rapper was coming up. Obviously Kanye had blown up by then, and there was a lot of cool stuff happening in the Chicago hip hop scene. And just through friendly connections, I started managing a rapper, which is not what most law students do, but I started managing. And then after law school, I just kept doing management, and I started my own management company, Cigar City Management. At its peak, I had 10 bands on our roster, so it was keeping me very busy. And I ended up kind of putting the law stuff on the back burner just because I was enjoying the management side, and it was fruitful. And I started doing A&R for a company called Symphonic Distribution. I started a label company. I wore a bunch of different hats within the industry, and then the pandemic happened. And I suddenly went from being incredibly busy with 10 bands who are touring nonstop across the country to, okay, now everybody's sitting at home for an indefinite period. So I figured if I was ever going to shift back my focus to law, that was a great time to do it. So I started studying for the bar and took the bar here in Florida and started my music law practice. And I think it's been great because, most lawyers are just lawyers, but I've worn a lot of different hats in the industry and kind of seen what it's like to be an artist manager, seen what it's like to be in the trenches with the artist. So I think it gives me a unique perspective that most lawyers in the music industry don't have, because before I was a lawyer, I was actually in the industry for some time.
So that seems to be a theme among a lot of the guests I've had, is they feel that they are excellent at the jobs that they do because they wore that musician hat first. So it's kind of like you can not only sympathize with what musicians are going through, but you can truly empathize with them.
Totally, yeah. And there actually are a number of music lawyers who were musicians first and are still musicians. So I think in general in the industry, everybody wants to be an artist. When you start out, you start playing and you want people to hear your songs and you want to be the star of the show. But I think and maybe you will relate to this as a bass player, is sometimes if you take a background role or a support role, you're vitally important to what's going on stage or what's going on in the songs, but you're not necessarily the star. And I think that's think that's kind of how I feel as a lawyer, is I'm vital to the process, but nobody knows who I am.
I've always said, unless you're somebody like Victor Wooten, who's really like out in the front doing all your fancy solos and stuff, a great bass player is only really noticed when they're absent.
Yeah.
Like, just sit there, set a good pocket, allow
Mhm.
all the instruments to do what they need to do, help carry the rhythm. But if you ain't there, if you drop out, people are like, "What happened? The bottom fell
Yeah,
out."
yeah.
It's like, that was
No, it's true. And sometimes people don't even notice the bass, and like you said, until it's gone. You know, it's like it becomes such a part, an integral part of the music, that you don't
mm,
realize that it's even there sometimes if you're playing in the
glue.
pocket. And yeah, yeah. So that's, man, I'm getting chills. This is why I love playing bass. I haven't played with a band in a long time, so I'm gonna have to sit in sometime with somebody. And yeah,
Absolutely. So, a lot of the topics we're gonna talk through were actually questions or suggested topics that I had listeners or people on social media send to me when kind of posted out, "Hey, I'm going to be speaking to an attorney who specializes in music law. What do you wanna know?" And so that's where a lot of these topics, a lot of these questions came from. And
cool.
what one of the first questions that was suggested me to that I think is a great way of kind of starting our discussion going down that road. When and why do artists need to hire a lawyer? Are there certain metrics? Are there certain milestones, or do they need one from the first time that they write a song?
Yeah, that's a great question, and honestly something I get asked a lot. And my answer is kind of a cop out, but my answer is, when do you need a lawyer? Right now. You
Mm,
need a lawyer immediately. You might not even know that you need a lawyer, but I think anytime, the real answer is really anytime that you're collaborating with someone in the industry. If it's just you're on your own, you're writing your own songs, you may not need a lawyer necessarily. It might be helpful to copyright your music, or trademark your name or something like that. But in everyday day-to-day business, you really only need a lawyer once you're collaborating with somebody. And that could be an engineer or producer on your project. It could be a fellow songwriter that you're working with, a featured artist, a side musician, a session musician. Anytime somebody else is being brought in and you're working together creatively, you should have some kind of agreement, something where everybody is very clear on what their expectations are, what their responsibilities are, and what the ownership is. And that's the thing that people don't really think about too much with music, is owning the song, owning the composition, owning the master record. Those are questions that you really need to figure out. Who owns what percentages do we split, or what have you. And it certainly helps to have a lawyer, just to make sure everything's done correctly and that you're getting your fair share. So yeah, that would be the one metric, is when you're collaborating. Then you definitely.
gotcha. When it comes to choosing an attorney to represent you, I mean, obviously, Randy Ojeda Law,
Oh yeah, of course.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
fantastic, but beyond you, what should people be looking for when they're looking to hire a music lawyer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and a lot of times people think that they're okay with just having their friend read the agreement or whatever, but you really want somebody that is familiar with music law and the music industry in particular. It's kind of like, if you get in trouble and you get arrested, like, you want to hire a criminal lawyer who knows the judges and knows the prosecutor and knows the system and knows how far they can push and how far you can pull. It's the same way with music. You want somebody that knows the major players in the industry, that knows how the industry operates and knows how things are supposed to work. And that's hard to find, because like you said, music is such a specialized industry and it's such a specific piece of law. But there are definitely music lawyers out there, and there are some people that dabble in entertainment law, or like they might do something else during the day and then like kind of moonlight with music. They're definitely out there. I would just search for somebody that has industry experience, that used to work for a label, or used to work for had a management company like myself, or somebody that is a musician, or just somebody that has some insight into the industry, is who you're looking for.
So when you are making those initial contacts with music lawyers, are there certain questions we should be asking? Are there certain, I don't know, red flags that go? Because whenever I've had other guests on, they've taught, red flags to look for when you're hiring a manager or hiring an agent or working with a a talent buyer, booking agent, what are some red flags that we should be looking for when we're looking into hiring a music lawyer?
Yeah, on red flags, I would just say look out for people that aren't really music lawyers. So like they might have 50 different types of law listed on their website, and one of them happens to be entertainment law, or one of them happens to be music law. I'm not discrediting any of those lawyers because I'm sure they do what they do fine, but look for somebody that really does specialize in this field because it's so specific. So, but beyond that, like there's a lot of different ways that music lawyers kind of get paid and how they structure deals with their clients. So not a lot of red flags in that sense. I'll always be worried like sometimes a music lawyer will take a gross percentage of an artist's revenue in exchange for doing kind of all their legal work. So be wary of somebody that's asking for too much, like over.
Is that like working on spec where they're saying, I don't get paid until you get paid and I get a certain percentage of whatever your income or royalties are?
Exactly. And for certain clients, that can be a really good fit because there's so much work coming in, and it's kind of a good symbiotic relationship, if you will, where you're rather than racking up hundreds of billable hours or what have you, you're part of the team. You're more invested. You can help with strategy and other like kind of in between job. I like doing that a lot for artists that I have a percentage because I can sort of put on the manager hat at times, still be the lawyer, but like offer advice that otherwise I would just be a hired gun. So being on the team is really nice. And but be wary. Like I typically come in between like 5 to 8% depending on the situation. But I've heard of attorneys asking for 10 or 15% or higher, and it's like at that point, be wary of who you're hiring. Unless you're getting the best attorney in town. I don't know. Unless you're getting something really special out of the relationship, I would recommend, if you're looking for a percentage-based representation, somewhere around 5% is what you want to be at.
Gotcha. So I know the answer to this is probably going to be it depends based on context, region, but something like trademarking a name, what would that normally run a band price wise or number of billable hours wise? Because I feel like for a lot of bands, that's kind of like one of their first things is, hey, we have a great name, we need to trademark it or whatever. How much are you looking normally in that a ballpark for that?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the attorney and, like you said, the region. But for the initial registration, the one thing you do want to budget is it costs the fees that you pay the trademark office are $250 per class. And typically musicians want to register their trademark in two classes, one class being recorded music and sound and the other class being live music. So hopefully I'm not getting too into the weeds here, but either way, you want to budget. Yeah, you want to budget like at least $500 just for those fees. And then from there, I mean, I've seen people be anywhere from $1,500 for flat fee to the registration or an hourly, whatever their hourly fees. It typically takes a couple hours to do the registration, sometimes more if there's a lot of like exhibits you need to attach, or if it's a more complicated structure. But yeah, I mean, definitely though, stay away from like the trademark websites that are like $50 and we'll trademark everything for you. I've heard a lot of horror stories about people in those situations, and oftentimes they end up having to come to a lawyer like myself anyways because the initial registration wasn't done properly. So now they got to clean it up later, and that can sometimes hurt your whole mark. So
Yeah, I'd assume it's like anything else. Pay the money on the front end. It's a lot cheaper to do it right the first time than it is to fix it next time.
yeah, and that's kind of that's the theme of being a music lawyer is I end up fixing a lot of, I guess being a lawyer in general, you end up fixing a lot of mistakes that people make initially because they're trying to save a buck or they're trying to do things the easier way rather than the correct way. So in general, yeah, I mean that's gonna that thought and that concept is gonna come up.
Yeah. So next topic, we're talking about trademarking. Let's go over to copyright. We've got, what was the big one that just wrapped up? Ed Sheeran versus Marvin Gaye. You had Vanilla Ice versus Queen and David Bowie. You had Jay Dilla and 10cc, even like Jay Dilla had been gone for a long time.
Yeah.
what is copyright infringement? How is it defined? What are examples of it? And then how can musicians avoid it?
Yeah, great question. And this is going to be another kind of cop out answer, but it really depends. It's unfortunately kind of subjective. Like there used to be, there used to be kind of old wives' tales where people would be like, oh, well, as long as you're copying less than 2 seconds or less than 5 notes or whatever it is, then you're fine. But the Marvin Gaye case actually proved that that's incorrect according to the courts, because they found that the feeling of the song, the mood, the vibe, however you want to say it, that's what defined the song, and that was what was infringed upon. So now technically you can copyright a vibe, I guess. So
how does that even work?
I don't know. And that's what's kind of
Metallica has copyrighted 123 BPM. So like I'm asking that sincerely. Like how does one say that you're infringing on my vibe?
Yeah, well, that's where the courts come into play, because it is subjective. Like it is a case by case thing where you have to analyze these songs and see where the inspiration came from, if you will. And it's kind of a scary time for songwriters, because there isn't really a hard and fast definition, and that's what makes it tough. Yeah, I would say it's just a tough time. There's never been a ruling like that. That's why that case was so insurmountable and so important to the industry. But back to kind of the main question, what is copyright infringement? I mean, like I said, it could be anything. It could be stealing a couple notes. It could be stealing. Oftentimes, I mean, you see it with samples. And I believe I'm not intimately familiar with the J Dilla case, but I believe it had to do with sampling.
Of course, Vanilla Ice and Queen. Vanilla's whole thing, it was like, theirs goes na 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 na. Mine goes na 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 na. Snick. It's the snick that's the difference.
Yeah. I've heard him say that. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if that is that enough to make it different. I don't remember the specifics of that one either.
So going back to kind of 1,000-foot view, what is copyright infringement?
Yeah, copyright infringement is using someone else's intellectual property or their copyright. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a registered copyright. There's what's called like a poor man's copyright, where just by creating something and writing something and putting it out into the world, you have some basic intellectual property rights that prevent people from taking your work in that sense. But if you want to enforce those rights, if you want to actually sue somebody, or you want to actually stop them or get their music taken down or what have you, you need an actual registered copyright. So that's where you actually go to the copyright office online, of course, and fill out the copyright registration form, and a lawyer can do this for you, or you can even do it yourself if you're so inclined. And then you actually get the registered copyright. And once you register your copyright, you're eligible for what's called statutory damages. So there's a statute, there's a law that says if somebody infringes on my registered copyright, I get X amount of damages, and that could be up to $250,000, I believe is the math. Whereas if you don't register your copyright and you try to stop somebody, and it's not registered yet, you can only get what's called actual damages. So you'd only be able to earn the money that was actually quote unquote taken from you. So,
but
yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does.
So
it does.
Kind of got out.
No, what I'm thinking here is obviously there's blatant examples. Like I said, the Vanilla Ice thing, blatant example. A snick, when it's obvious you sampled it. But
sure,
to go biblical, Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. We only have so many notes. We only have so many patterns. In the English language, we've got a lot of words, but only so many of them rhyme together, certain meters and stuff. And like you said, it's kind of a scary time right now for musicians, with people putting music out online all the time, because it's easier than ever. I can go to CD Baby or DistroKid and put music up, or on my YouTube page, put stuff up. What can musicians be doing in a practical sense to protect themselves?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, register your work with the Copyright Office. I mean, that would be the first step. And they've made it a little bit easier to do that. Now you can copyright a whole album at once rather than just copywriting individual songs. So, when you put out an album, copyright that album, make sure you get the copyright certificate. then at least you're protected on that end. But beyond that, working with a good distributor, like a distributor would be like DistroKid or CD Baby, but a lot of them can a little bit more proactive about helping you maintain your rights. So like YouTube has a system called Content ID that matches up content, like matches up music in that other people are using in their videos with your sound files. And most distributors feature this when they distribute music, and they're able to kind of monitor that end of things and send out takedown notices, when there's a situation where somebody's using your music. So look into that. I don't know the specifics of whether DistroKid offers that or CD Baby or what have you at this point, but look into it, see if Content ID is something that's offered, because generally when infringement occurs, YouTube is kind of the first place that it happens, because like you said, it's so easy. You don't have to go through a third party to upload a YouTube. So it's a lot easier for people to kind of steal things on YouTube. Look into Content ID.
Hey folks, we'll get right back to the show. If you're enjoying this episode and finding any value at all from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would take just a few seconds to leave a review on whichever platform you're listening to the Book Your Band podcast. Your review and comments go a long way in helping new listeners find our show, and honestly, it just makes my day. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. The heart of the show is all about the live music industry. YouTube's kind of a good jumping point to ask, what is the difference between covering another artist's song recorded versus your performance rights for performing another artist's songs live?
Yeah. If you're recording a cover, you need to get the license, the mechanical license required in order to release that cover song. And then it's like a small percentage of every play or every stream from that song will go directly to the artist because you've obtained that license. And anybody can obtain a license for any song. So, I mean, you can basically record whatever cover you want as long as you get the license.
Now, is there a fee for that? So say I wanted to cover a Bob Dylan song on YouTube. I have to register for a license to cover that song on an acoustic YouTube performance?
Technically, yes. But, oftentimes this kind of goes under the radar. And if you're just, I mean, it's less for a YouTube performance and more for like releasing a song onto like Spotify and Apple Music and onto the store. That at that point you need the license. But if you're just kind of performing songs on YouTube, typically you're not the license to really come after you for that, because that kind of falls into more of the performance side, which like you were saying, there's the distinction between recorded music covers, performance covers. So you don't need permission to play a Bob Dylan song when you're performing live at a venue, because theoretically that venue has a relationship with the PROs, with ASCAP, EMI, CSAC, and they're handling the license for compositions. But that's neither here nor there. If you're a musician, what you need to understand is that if you're performing live, you can play any song that you want, and you don't need special permission to do so. But once you want to release that song, then that's when you need something to protect you.
And so I think that's a really interesting distinction, because a lot of my experience comes from like the contemporary Christian world and the worship world. And like, you play a song in a church, you file your CCLI on it, because you have to pay if you're supposed to. If you're playing it in a gathered assembly, it is a live performance, but you're supposed to pay your CCLI for it, for the rights to perform that song as a congregation. But if I go see Fish and they cover Roses Are Free by Ween, they're not having to pay Ween to cover that. Right?
No. Yeah, they're not. And I'm honestly not too familiar with the contemporary Christian world. So I actually didn't know that you need specific license to perform it as a congregation. That's interesting.
Yep. If you ever go visit a church and they have projectors, a lot of times at the end of a song in the bottom corner, it'll say CCLI and whatever the registration number is.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I've seen that.
So that's, but I've always thought that was an interesting distinction, that a gathering of 80 or 100 people were paying royalties on using this song as corporate worship, but Fish selling out Madison Square Garden doesn't have to pay.
There's no problem. Yeah. Well, that's one of the many things that needs to kind of be figured out with the music industry in the US is like there's a lot of stuff that is kind of outdated and it really doesn't make sense. So maybe
So
there
give me
should be
some
some
examples
there.
of those. Give me some examples of things you perceive as being outdated and need to be kind of brought into the modern
Yeah,
era.
just kind of royalties in general. Like you have your performance royalties, you have your mechanical royalties, you have your digital performance royalties that are collected through Sound Exchange. You have all these different organizations that are kind of collecting different pieces of the pot, and to navigate that is so complex and requires lawyers and accountants and business managers. But I would definitely like to see it streamlined in a way where artists can kind of go to one place and just get their royalties. And there are some companies that are trying to offer solutions like that, but it's still not as easy and as widespread as I think it should. Because you go to DistroKid to collect your Spotify streams, and then you go to BMI or ASCAP and they send you your performance royalties. And then you go to SoundExchange, they send the digital performance royalties, and then you go to the Mechanical Licensing Collective, they're sending you your mechanical royalties. And it's like, by the time you get everything that you're supposed to get, it's like, I don't know how you don't have a headache from just thinking about it. So that's something I would definitely like to see streamlined. Another interesting bit, and this kind of comes back to my work in A&R and distribution, is I wish artists had some kind of like artist, and they have IPI numbers, but those work a little bit differently, but some kind of artist like social security number where like when you release, like say you're releasing a song and the featured artist is Snoop Dogg, rather than right now to prove that it's actually Snoop Dogg so that it would go on Snoop Dogg's page, you have to send in paperwork and there's a whole process to try to tee to Spotify that you're not just pretending that Snoop Dogg's on your track. And a lot of times these things will kind of cut through, and sometimes there will be like a song that says it has Snoop Dogg and you go to listen to it and it's like, that's not Snoop Dogg. Like, what is... And now with like AI and stuff, like that can get super crazy. But yeah, so going back to my point is I wish there was like a number or something that you could put in an artist number and it would like kind of auto verify that they are who they are and that you can release the track them. So that's like a super specific thing, but it's something that's always bothered just because there's a lot of situations where maybe it's not somebody as large as Snoop Dogg, but it's an artist who is pretty popular and popular enough that like they're featured on a track and the Spotify doesn't believe you. Like they don't believe that that's actually who it is, and that can delay the release of your song and kind of put some extra hoops in place to getting something released. But I totally understand the reason to limit fraud in that sense too, because I could just say like, oh, I have this song with Snoop Dogg and put it out, and somebody's got to check on that thing. So I wish there was a more streamlined way to handle like that specific issue.
So it sounds like you have all these different players and you're wishing for some kind of centralized database or numbering system where they could just all easily communicate and verify you are who you say you are and you're getting paid what you should be getting paid.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So that's exactly the system I'd love to see. I just don't know if the music industry is organized enough to get there. And maybe in time it will. Like I think music's unfortunate because there's not really like a musicians union the way there's like the writers union, the writers guild, stuff in Hollywood. Hollywood is able to everybody's able to go on strike and fight for new conditions, but music, that's not really the case, because if you just stop performing or stop releasing music, there's 20 million other people doing exactly that. So it's like you're not going to be missed if you're trying to boycott the industry. So it's,
I know like in Nashville, there's a Nashville Musicians Union that sets minimum pay. If you're playing on Broadway or whatever, you get X number of hours, gives you guaranteed access to health care, things of that sort. But you're saying that's not really a unified national kind of entity.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know Nashville has that, and there are some other areas that are like Austin, I think, has a similar musicians network, and that's definitely something that's happening on local and regional levels, but I would like to see it be more of a national thing.
Gotcha. So
yeah,
one of the next kind of prompts that was thrown out to me that people were curious about are, what are the different types of contracts that musicians should be aware of? A lot of people, they've been playing in their garages or playing local venues. They don't really know what all types of paperwork, what all types of agreements could be coming their way. as they make it to the next level. So could you just
Yeah.
kind of give a general rundown of what are some common agreements, common contracts in the music industry?
I mean, there's ton, and there's a lot of like super specific ones, but the most common you're going to run into is the agreements with like your team. So your management agreements, your label agreements. Sometimes your agent will have an agreement. Sometimes your publicity company or your PR company might have an agreement for you. So there's obviously those situations where you're partnering with somebody else to kind of help develop your career. And those are super important agreements because you could sign with a manager and they could have stuff in their contract that gives them royalties or gives them more access to your money or to your career than they should have. And you got to be careful in those situations.
Isn't that where a lot of the Taylor Swift issue is coming from?
I was about to say Taylor Swift is a perfect example of that, and she signed a bad deal when she was really young, and it's still kind of haunting her. Luckily for her, she's Taylor Swift, so she's able to kind of overcome a lot of the issues, and
she's doing all right.
She's doing fine. So I'm not crying for Taylor Swift, but I do love Taylor Swift, so I don't want to say anything bad about her.
So no, you were talking about how management deals can kind of go bad.
Right. Oh, yes. The different deals you can find. So yeah, there's deals when you're adding to your team. There's like I alluded to earlier, there's deals where you're collaborating with somebody. So you'll have, the most common contract, and people don't really think of it as a contract, but it's super important. You don't need a lawyer for it, but you absolutely need to have split sheets. So split sheets are basically just a simple document that says, when you're writing a song with somebody, I own 40% of this song, you own 30% of the song, so-and-so owns the other 30%, whatever, however you want to break it down. But it breaks down how you're splitting ownership of the song. There's templates online that you can find. You can email me. I will send you a free template for a split sheet if you need it. There's apps that you can do split sheets on the apps now. So, I mean, there's a lot of different options, but basically, anytime you're in the studio with somebody collaborating and you're writing a song, you need to bust out the split sheet and you need to sign. Even if it's on a napkin corner and it says, I own 50%, you own 50%, whatever it is, split sheet is the most basic contract that every songwriter needs in particular. So there's split sheets, there's collaboration agreements, there's side artist agreements. This is when you have somebody performing on a song, like playing guitar or something on a song, you get a side artist agreement. There's producer agreements. So if you have somebody that's actually helping you produce the record, there's engineer agreements for mixing and mastering, depending on if sometimes a mixing engineer will ask for a percentage of the song or what have you in lieu of payment or in lieu of excess payment. So there's those kinds of deals, collaboration agreements, and there's a number of like live performance agreements. And this is important for people listening to the Book Your Band podcast, is you want performance agreements for if you're going on tour. Having an agreement with the other band that you're opening for can be smart, so that, again, what times you're supposed to perform, how long your sets are, how much money you're getting, pretty basic things, but that should be in a contract. A live performance agreement, so if you're going to play at a venue, you should, again, have in your contract, you should have some kind of contract that says, I'm going to get paid this amount, payments due up front or payments due immediately at the end of the performance or what have you. And a lot of like smaller venues don't really do agreements like that, and I totally understand if there's not that much money involved why you wouldn't. But as you start to rise up in the industry and you start playing bigger and bigger venues, it becomes important to have those agreements and make sure that you're getting paid what you're supposed to get paid when you're supposed to get paid. And questions like, what happens if you have to cancel the show? We're in like we said earlier, we're in the post-COVID-19 era, so it's like, what is an artist gets COVID and they have to cancel, or they get sick, or their voice stops working, whatever it is, who's responsible for that? How do the tickets get reimbursed? How do, are you obligated to reschedule? Things like that can all.
And that's something I was going to ask you about, was as you're figuring out these contracts, are these issues of liability, are they handled by a third-party insurance company? Are they something that
they can be? Yeah.
It's kind of just, is it something that can be negotiated of who carries what responsibility, the venue versus the artist, or how is that normally handled?
Yeah, I mean, everything can be negotiated. So there's definitely, you can definitely negotiate that. But, oftentimes, it will fall on your insurance company. And That's why it's really good to have some kind of liability insurance as a performer, in addition to the venues having their own liability insurance. It just helps in those situations. Because yeah, I mean, we're talking about specifically like cancellation liability, but there's also, obviously like the Travis Scott situation, like somebody gets hurt or trampled or something at your show, who's responsible for that? That's I'm sure they busted out the contracts in that one and looked over who was who was responsible. So
yeah. So you had mentioned collaboration agreements. Everybody thinks that their band's just going to work out and we're going to be best buddies forever. But
sure, yeah,
the Beatles, Motley Crue, Pink Floyd, Beach Boys, these are all bands that have had historic interband lawsuits, whether it be over use of the name, whether it be over royalties, whatever. So what are some general guidelines that bands should consider when having that really difficult conversation? Normally the most important conversations are the difficult ones. Yeah. What should be considered when a band is coming up with their partnership agreements?
Yeah. So first off, you should have a band partnership agreement. A lot of bands don't, and that's one of the situations like we were talking about earlier. You're paying a little bit more now to pay less later. And a band partnership agreement is absolutely one of those situations, because in a band partnership agreement, you really want to spell out, again, questions of ownership. Who owns the band name? Who owns the songs? What percentages do we own the songs for? It's different than if you're a rapper collaborating with a producer. You might make a one-off agreement. As a band, you're writing songs together in the studio, you're writing songs in the practice room. It's hard to delineate, oh, I wrote 60% of this song, you wrote 40% of that song, or whatever. Like it's a lot easier to kind of spell that out and say like Lennon and McCartney, they split all their songs 50-50. It's a lot easier to figure out those things in a band agreement early on than it is to figure them out after you've broken up and you hate each other. So yeah, questions like who owns what, who owns the band equipment, for example. That's something a lot of people don't think about, is like if you purchase a PA system together as a band, when the band breaks up, who gets to keep that PA system? Who gets to keep amplifiers or lighting equipment or whatever else that you bought for your live show? What happens if one member wants to leave but the rest of the band wants to continue? What happens in that situation? What happens if you need to fire a member, if somebody needs to be forcibly removed? Is it a vote? Is it based on merit, or are there certain rules and conditions that the band members need to follow? I worked with a band who was a sober band, and that was one of the things that they put in their contracts, is like you can't be drinking while you're performing, or you have to stay sober during our tours. Whatever you do outside of the tour is on you, but during the tour, it's a sober. And that's something that they had in their band agreement, was, which you don't often see. That's where you can kind of put in. It's very similar to an operating agreement for a business, where you spell out basically the rights and rules of the organization. You do the same thing with a band.
So again, are there certain metrics to be followed, determined, or is it, hey, welcome to our first rehearsal, let's sit down and map this out? Or do you think it's when you get ready to release your first song, or whenever you get ready to start booking your first tour? At one point, should those band participation agreements start being worked out?
Yeah, I think at whatever point you consider your band to be professional, like whenever you cross the threshold of, hey, we're just hanging out, to, okay, now this is a business and we're making money, or you're not making money, which a lot of bands are not, unfortunately. But, when you start treating it like a business, that's when you need the band partnership. And so at some point, most bands should have some kind of business structure, some kind of LLC or an S corp, or whatever makes sense for their corporate structure. And typically when you start that is when you also need to put a band agreement together to kind of go along with the business. So really, yeah, it's whenever you're taking it seriously and treating it like a business. And it's hard to say when exactly that moment is, but I think most people would know if they're in the band.
Well, you mentioned filing as a business. So I know a lot of bands will file as an LLC, because if everything goes to pot, then it passes through. It doesn't hit their personal assets. It hits the assets of the band. If a band's trying to weigh between being, or an individual artist is trying to weigh between being LLC versus S corp versus partnership, sole proprietorship, which would you suggest most often? And what would be some caveats to that?
Well, it definitely depends on which state you're in first, because different states have different rules regarding business formation and LLC formations. So I can only really speak for like Florida, and Florida basically has no rules. It's it's kind of the Wild West in the East, and you can basically LLCs are are the easiest to form and the easiest to maintain. They have the least amount of requirements. You don't have to have bylaws. You don't have to have scheduled meetings with minutes. There's less yearly filings that you have to make. It's a lot cheaper to form. So typically in most states, I would recommend an LLC for it. But again, I'm not an accountant, but if you talk to your accountant, a lot of accountants say that, I believe it's once you're making like $40,000 or so that you can have more tax savings as an S corp versus an LLC. So maybe if you're already bringing in that much money, that would be a situation where you might want to consider an S corp versus an LLC. But for most bands just starting out, this is still kind of a side hustle, it's not really making that much money, but it's making enough that you need to start filing taxes for it, then typically an LLC is going to be in your best interest. I wouldn't recommend a partnership or a sole proprietorship for the liability reasons, and I could get into like the law school answer of why you shouldn't do that.
Give us the explain like I'm five reasons.
Yeah, just if you're a sole proprietorship or a partnership, your personal assets are still able to be. I don't want to use the word attacked. I don't know what word I want to use, but they are still.
They can take your crap.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, exactly. They can still take your personal assets in a partnership. So I would definitely do the LLC. It's just way more flexible, way easier to work. The requirements are usually less stringent than other formations, and yeah, that's just my recommendation.
So for anyone that's listening to this episode, they're like, I just want to play my guitar and sing some songs. But I like that you distinguish. There's a difference between thinking about being a musician as a side hustle or a hobby and thinking about it as a business. I mean, those are
very
diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
So if from your legal perspective, as an expert in the law, somebody's starting to get some momentum behind them, there's a lot of potential players that they could be looking to hire as part of their team, whether it be manager, agent, lawyer, accountant. Who would you suggest them going after first to kind of be the first member of their team, and why?
I mean, I'm definitely biased, but your lawyer. Your lawyer should absolutely be the first member of your team, because you're going to sign a deal with a manager that's going to be way more involved than anything that you do with your lawyer, and is important to your career in a different kind of way. But you will basically want a lawyer so that you can protect yourself when you make that management deal, when you sign with that agent, when you sign that record label. Typically, you want the lawyer to be the first person on your team. And that's kind of the catch-22 of music law, is that a lot of lawyers won't take on the project yet because it's kind of in its infancy and there aren't other people involved. But that's when the lawyer needs to start being involved, is before these other entities come into play, so that you can make sure that the deals that you're signing with those companies is one that's in your best interest.
So generally, a lot of individuals in your field will wait until maybe there is a management deal or an agent deal being hung in front of you before they'll actually take you on to their roster as a client.
Exactly. Yeah, that happens a lot, and it makes sense, because you don't want to use the word waste your time. You just don't want to spend your time working with something that's not going to go somewhere. At the same time, like I like to work with artists at the earliest point that I can, because it can help them avoid a lot of mistakes as we go down the line.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. Going back here, I'm looking at my list of suggested topics that folks on social media set. Endorsements and sponsorships. So a lot of bands, when they're starting to take off and they're booking X number of shows, playing certain cap venues, then sometimes they'll either start applying for sponsorships or endorsements, or they'll get reached out to. So like I have friends who are endorsed by Pearl Drums, by Diodario Strings. I'm not endorsed by them, but this will be the second episode in a row that I've dropped this, but there's a company called Eargasms
I love eargasms.
Love them. This
Yeah.
is the second episode in a row where we've sung the praises of eargasms. They're not a sponsor of the show. I'm not personally endorsed by them, but I don't leave home without my little
With your little pouch
on my
yeah.
on my keys. And so, what do those endorsement or sponsorship agreements normally look like? And what are the different types that are normally seen? And what are some things that artists should look for to make sure that it's an equitable opportunity for them and the company?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different types of endorsement and sponsorship deals. There's basically two main types, and usually that's the difference between endorsement versus sponsorship. So an endorsement deal is typically, a brand will post about you on their social media, and you might have a portal where you can purchase Pearl drums or certain gear at a reduced rate because you're endorsed by this company. But typically with those deals, there's not usually like an exclusivity. You don't have to use their gear. It's just like, this is another avenue where we kind of co-promote together. And you're not going to make money that way as a musician, but you might save money on gear versus an actual sponsorship is where you see like your Victor Wootens or like Mike Portnoy or Steve Moore or whoever. Typically you see this a lot with drummers because drummers have so much gear, but bass players and guitar players and everything too. When you're actually sponsored by a partner, you're typically going to be paid something for using their gear, but you'll also have to exclusively use their gear. So Stanton Moore is a good example. Like I forget which drum company he's endorsed by.
Stanton Moore of Galactic?
Of Galactic. Yeah, one of my favorite bands.
Okay.
And Stan Moore's a world-class drummer in New Orleans. He was playing a show in Tampa, and they actually had to fly in his a drum kit for him so that he could play the same kit that he's supposed to play. And that happens a lot for drummers where like you have to use specific cymbals, you have to use specific gear at all your performances or at all your appearances, all your drum clinics, everything. And that's going to be a sponsorship. So typically you're not going to get a sponsorship until you're somebody that's gigging heavily. Like you don't have to be Stanton Moore, you don't have to be Mike Portnoy, you don't have to be Victor Wooten, but you have to be touring heavily and on the road a lot with a major band. Some that's at least you're doing 500 cap rooms, if not bigger.
You mentioned Victor, that my humble brag opportunity. I had the opportunity to go to dinner with Victor and his family a few years back. And it was incredible. But one of the things I asked him, because he kind of shocked the music world, like the bass player world, because he had been an Ampeg artist for years. And then all of a sudden he switched over to Hartke. And I was asking him about what kind of led to that change. And he had said that he loved that whenever he had any issues or any questions, he called Hartke and he talked to the owner of the company. And so just that relational element was one of the things that he said led to him switching after all those years with Ampeg. I mean, it's Victor. He can make a Kleenex box sound phenomenal, but
that's true.
But okay. So I thank you for breaking down the difference between endorsements and sponsorships, because some of the questions I had about that on social media, I think people didn't understand the differences. That very helpful.
Yeah. Definitely, like when you're sorry to just to add on to that point, when you're looking at these brand sponsorships, so it doesn't necessarily have to be gear, but be very careful about exclusivity clauses. Like I had a client who was sponsored for a campaign by Pepsi, and they had an exclusivity where it's like you can't work with any other beverage company. So that means like you couldn't work with Bud Light, couldn't work with whatever, like couldn't work with a water company because it's any beverage. So we actually like went into that deal and negotiated it to be specifically like soft drink beverages. Like basically don't work with Coke. Like
does that mean them as individuals or the venues they were playing at?
Them as individuals. So this was an ad where they used this artist's music in the campaign, and they basically said like you can't use your music. Yeah, like initially it was in any beverage, and then we got it changed to specifically we couldn't really say the word Coke in the contract. We couldn't say Coca-Cola, but that's basically what it was. It was like, you can't work with Coca-Cola, you can't work with 7-Up, any other beverage, go for it.
Was there a time limit on that, or was it?
Oh yeah. There
Okay.
is. It was like for a couple years, but still, I mean, if you're the type of artist that's getting endorsements, and getting brand partnerships, and getting these offers in place, you don't want to limit yourself by having an exclusivity clause that opts you out of working with the people you want to work with.
So the reason I asked if it was the individual versus the artist, kind of switching gears now, is thinking about like writers, and thinking like Morrissey, who refuses to perform at a venue if they are serving meat because he's obviously a very outspoken vegan. And I mean, there's so much lore around the idea of a writer. I think a lot of that comes from the whole Van Halen, no brown M&Ms, which actually was really smart because they were traveling and they had pyrotechnics. And David Lee Roth's whole thing was, you didn't read this, I don't trust walking out on stage with lots of things that can blow me up. But because of that, there's so much lore around the idea of writers. So can you kind of talk through what is a writer, and what are things that are normally realistic asks that artists would put into their writers?
So a rider is essentially a document that you would send to a venue ahead of time, basically stating that these are your sort of add-on requirements for performing the show. So obviously you've already figured out the money, you've already figured out the kind of the core important stuff, but on your rider is where you would suggest things like, we need 2 green rooms for whatever reason. The band members don't get along, they need 2 green rooms or whatever. Or you need, like, for the it's a lot of it has to do with hospitality. So it's like, what are you serving backstage? Like, what other amenities do you need? Like, what is, but it can also be gear related to, like, you specifically need a certain type of mic stand, or certain type of, whatever. That can all be put in your rider. What's realistic? Well, that depends on how large of an artist you are. I've seen some insane riders in my day, and some artists that, like, it just ask for crazy things. Like, remember, not to Killer Mike on the spot, but when I was working for Symphonic Distribution, we did a show with Killer Mike, and he wanted specifically, like, chicken from this one chicken place in Harlem. The show was in New York, so somebody had to go, like a runner had to leave the venue, go to Harlem, pick up this chicken, and bring it back for Killer Mike. And so what's reasonable? I don't know. I mean, whatever you can get for how big of an artist you are. And I do think, with like the David Lee Roth example with the brown M&Ms, like, there are some situations where I feel like an artist is just putting stuff in the rider to see if people will do it. But other times, I mean, it could be legitimately, like, for your show or for your health or for your safety, when you're asking for things like a private green room, or if you require a bathroom, obviously you require a bathroom. If you require a shower or something like that, those are things that you can put in the rider. And if the venue can accommodate it, they will typically, and they have budgets assigned to this. But also be careful, because sometimes that money can come out of your pay. Like, if they're having to go and buy 400 water bottles or whatever, it's like they sometimes that can come out of your actual pay, depending on what the contract says. So be careful.
Yeah, the times I've done fly dates and stuff, and whichever band I was playing with at the time was like, hey, what do you want in your rider? I was like, 2 bottles of water, maybe a banana if I'm feeling really picky. But no, I understand, for people that live their life on the road, there are certain standards living, certain dietary expectations. I know that we're getting close to running out of time here. And again, thank you so much for your expertise.
Absolutely.
Kind of the last question that I had on here was, and it goes back partly to the copyright, but falls more under maybe physical products, intellectual property as connected to, like, merchandising and stuff like that. What are some considerations people should be making when it comes to their logos, to their merch designs? What maybe are some things that, as obviously bands, most of the money we're making, if you're new to the show, you don't make a lot of money actually playing. You make most of your money on merch. Yeah. So So that's obviously been a major consideration. People have been asking questions about what are things that we need to consider on the legal front when we're starting to put our merch together.
Yeah, great question. And I do represent some like visual artists that do merchandise for art for bands. So I've kind of seen this from both sides. And the biggest key is to have, again, anytime you're collaborating with somebody, you need an agreement. So you need some kind of agreement that figures out who, first off, who owns the logo, who owns the artwork that you're using, how long can you use the artwork for if the designer owns it, what kind of merchandise can you put the artwork on even. These are all questions that you should answer in an agreement with whoever's designing the art. So I would say that's like the biggest legal concern is the intellectual property rights of your actual merchandise and who owns the art and who owns the logos and stuff. But beyond that, just make sure you're not infringing on any other logos or artwork. Like I've seen some bands where they do like the Starbucks logo, but it's like a member's face or something like that instead of the Starbucks lady. Don't get yourself into situations where, you know, McDonald's or somebody's coming after you. But yeah, just be careful about what you're using and making sure that you have the rights to use whatever artwork or whatever material you're making on your merch.
Awesome. You've been so kind. Thank you for basically not charging us billable hours to consult on some of these questions.
Sure.
Where can listeners connect with you? Where can they find out more about your law practice? Can they find out more about your management company?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a couple places. So my law firm is at Randy Ojeda Law on all the socials. You can find me anywhere. RandyOjedaLaw.com. That's RandyOjedalaw.com. You can also find me personally at Real Randy Ojeda on all the socials. I'm not the fake Randy Ojeda, and there is a fake one out there, so be cautious. Make sure to find the real Randy Ojeda. That's me, and you can always ask me about anything that I'm doing. And eventually, hopefully in the very near future, you will be able to hear my podcast, Cigar City Radio, return with some new episodes. But in the meantime, we have over 100 episodes on Cigar City Radio. Artists like Tommy Stinson from The Replacements and the B-52s and Guar and we've had so many great interviews on Cigar City Radio. So if you want to check that out, do a deep dive into our archive and save that podcast for the return, which is coming soon.
Awesome. So I'll be sure to link up all of that in the show notes for the show, make it as easy as possible for people to find you everywhere online. Randy, thank you so much again. You have been a pleasure to talk to. And on behalf of my audience, thanks for giving us a little bit more of an insight on the legal side. It's never a fun thing to talk about, but something like we were talking about beforehand. Normally those difficult conversations are ones that need to be had before life kicks you in the booty.
Yeah. And just as a perk for your audience, if you are listening to this and you reach out to me and you mention that you heard me on the Book Your Band podcast, I will give you a free consultation. So
awesome. There you go, folks.
Yeah.
All right, Randy, thanks so much. Have a great evening, buddy.
All right, man. Take it easy, Tony.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Book Your Band podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I would sincerely appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and share the show with some of your friends. To stay informed on upcoming episodes, be sure to sign up for the Book Your Band mailing list and also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. All those links are available at www.bookyourbandpodcast.com.